Hi, welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So thank you so much for joining us today for this event. So my name is Mrinalini Rai, Director for Women for Biodiversity, and I'm really happy here for this event. So for event is on the Feminist Ally Coalitions at the United Nations. And I welcome you all for making the time for being here. Before we go for the beginning of the session, I just wanted to run some few things of why we are here. We are together at this event, and we'll be bringing the voices of our allies and friends from the 10 constituencies. We hope we have the time enough to cover all of them, but I'm really happy to be moderating this session. So first, we will have I'll quickly run through the house rules. So as you know, there is translation being provided, and we also have a live chat, which all of you have access to. So if you do have any questions, please do put them on there. So we will be able to answer some of them live. And at the end of the session, we also have some space for us to have an interactive session with our speakers. So the interpretation is available in French and English. And also please use the chat box, introduce yourselves, and ask questions about what does feminist solidarity mean for you. So next, before making much time here, I would like to quickly introduce you to the 10 constituencies that will be represented here. So this feminist coalition has been co-hosted by the Women's Major Group, the Feminist Response to COVID Collective, the CBD Women's Caucus, the Women's Rights Caucus, Women's Working Group on Finance for Development, the Women in Migration Network, Women's Major Group in the United Nations Forum on Forest, Women's Major Group of UNIA, and the Women's Major Group on UN Disaster Risk Reduction. So I'm very happy to welcome and introduce you to the three speakers who will be talking today. So with us, I have my colleague and my friends here. First, let me introduce you to Tetet Laurent. Tetet is a development worker with almost 30 years experience in multidisciplinary and multicultural settings at grassroots, national, regional, and international level, and has represented civil society in different advocacy arenas. And she joins us today to share the work of the Women's Major Group on Finance for Development, the Women's Major Group, and the Women and Gender Constituency at the UNFCCC. We have next with us is Sanam Amin. Sanam is a Bangladeshi writer, researcher, and facilitator committed to building a more equitable and just world, and is a member of the Feminist COVID Response Collective and of the Women's Rights Caucus on the Commission on the Status of Women. She joins us today to share the work of the Feminist Response to COVID Collective and the Women's Rights Caucus. Next, I'm very welcome to also welcome our colleague Cecilia. has over 34 years of field experience in mainstreaming gender and women's rights in policies and processes related to natural resources management. She founded a national NGO, Cameroon Ecology, and the African Women's Network for Community Management of Forests, a regional network within 20 countries in West and Central Africa. And today she will be sharing her experiences and some key messages from the women's and major constituencies engaged in different environmental related international forums, including the CBD Convention on Biological Diversity, the United Nations Forum on Forest, the UN Environment Assembly, and the UN Disaster Risk Reduction Process. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being here. So first, I want to pose a question to all three of you. With your experience and with all the amazing work and activism that you guys have all done in different forums, what are some of the key demands in the spaces that you have engaged with? So Tetet, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Tina, and good morning, good afternoon to all our sisters who are here today. So even before the pandemic, we were already telling the world and its leaders how women, indigenous peoples, farmers, workers, persons with disabilities, and other sectors are deeply affected by the multiple and multi-layered vulnerabilities due to obscene inequalities, poverty, exclusion, environmental degradation, the climate breakdown, repression of civic and political freedoms, and macho fascism. So we were already saying, how unjust the world's economic order is, where the world's richest 1% have more than twice as much wealth as the 6.9 billion people, where we have privatized social services, and where, there is unpaid care work, violence against women, and gender pay gap. These are the lived realities of women in all their diversity on how institutions at local, national, regional, and global levels have failed and continue to leave them behind. We live in a system that puts profits above people and planet, and it cannot be fixed with cosmetic solutions. It's therefore imperative to enable profound transformations to the global economic, trade, finance, and investments architecture, because we believe that we cannot heal in the same environment that made us sick. So all of this mantra now around clean, green, sustainable recovery, both from the pandemic and the multiple crises, with the same formula, under the same system, is like making over, a system that is principally responsible to the problems that we are facing right now. So as part of the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development and the Women and Gender constituency, we have structured, key demands that are basically centered around democratizing global economic governance, to effect redistribution, build real resilience, and enable women to realize their rights. So among the key demands that we are having at the moment is that of calling for a new global economic architecture that works for people and planet. And this we start by convening, under the UN auspices, an international economic reconstruction and system reform summit. We are also strongly calling for a debt cancellation and a sovereign debt workout mechanism, because the current debt suspension initiative is simply not enough. Now, number three among our demands would be a UN convention for redistributive justice, eliminate regressive taxation, and address decisively the issue of illicit financial flows. We also are pushing to create a global technology assessment mechanism at the United Nations. We are pushing to fully assess the developmental impacts of current trade and investment frameworks, and a review of the outcomes of all of these public-private partnerships, as well as the official development assistance framework. So in essence, Tina and sisters, we are hoping to promote a macroeconomic approach to gender equality and women's human rights. And this means a transformation to an economy that puts at the center people and their well-being. Thank you very much.
No, thanks a lot, Tete. And I think it's really very important where Susanam, you will come in next and seeing the way we have been dealing with the pandemic and the work that you have been doing with the COVID response. So I'm happy to welcome you and share your work that you've been doing with your networks.
Thank you, Tina. And it is always a pleasure to follow Tet because she's already laid the ground. And given the format of this event, I think I will not delve too deeply, but to really re-emphasize that the constituencies that I am honored and privileged to speak for today, that represent thousands of women and gender non-conforming people and their movements, we are ultimately calling for the realization of women's fundamental human rights, and we're coming at that from an intersectional feminist perspective that lifts all oppressed people. And the message is really about what Tet and I have got going here in the background, the system change. For a more just and equitable world. And what Tete has outlined, which is absolutely what we're calling for in the Feminist COVID Response Collective, as well as the Women's Rights Caucus, the how to get there and where to get the resources has been very detailed in terms of policy and mapping. You can go to sound economists such as Piketty, Thomas Piketty, economist anthropologists like Jason Hickel, who writes on climate and degrowth, Naila Kabir, who's a feminist economist. There are thinkers out there who have really laid out how we can do this when it comes to progressive tax, when it comes to restructuring debt, when it comes to a fairer people's trade agenda, all those structural barriers to having the resources we need for a feminist future. And that is a future where we don't need to work for survival, where we all have healthcare. And it doesn't matter our nationality, our status, our location. We have basic income, we have free education, where people with disabilities are centered in all that we create and do, where gender minorities and gender non-conforming people are centered, where we heal and nurture our planet in the midst of this climate crisis. And we trust the communities who are the custodians of our forests, where we recognize the struggles of land and environmental defenders and indigenous communities are the most important because they are fighting to save our lives, not just their ways. And we see that we can have a beautiful, equal, and just world instead of billionaires colonizing Mars. And this is all about addressing injustice. It means reparations. It means accountability and truth. And I acknowledge, for example, the children that were just found, over 1,000 children that were found in residential schools in Canada. This type of violence is ongoing and is still being experienced by marginalized and oppressed communities, including Indigenous communities. So ultimately what we're saying here is that system change is what we want. We know how to get there. Listen to us, and that's what the work of feminist coalitions globally are all about. Because we are the people, we are the power. Back to you, Tina.
No, Sanam, thanks a lot. I think building up from what you were talking about, there's work also around the UN discussions around, building back better, building back healthier. But then again, you also see a lot of influence of scoping out not alternatives that we are looking for, transformative change, but being on the same pathway. I think instead you talked about of looking at it's the same solutions, and I think the pandemic has actually enhanced this engagement to work with the private sector. So Cecile, coming up with you and looking at this environment, the different spaces, the UNFF, the CBD right now, are all really talking about a framework or talking about environment. And on one thing they're talking about is the right to a healthy environment and the role of women and women in it. So I want to share your experience of what have been the key messages from you and the coalition that you are representing into these UN spaces.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tina. And thank you all. It is a great for me to be together with you, our feminist allies. Today, I will talk about the Women Major Group at UNFF, the Women Major Group at UNA, Women's Caucus on CBD, and Women Major Group at UN, Disaster Risk Reduction. As you can understand, we are feminist constituencies in closely interrelated fields. So our demands are grouped in 10 issues. The first is our key demands, shared by our feminist allied constituencies in their intersectional work, is demanding change to all oppressive systems and ensuring the right to a healthy environment. Number two, ensuring that right holders have priorities. Indigenous people rights, women's rights, including rural women. Three, working on the synergies and coherence needed for all the Rio Conventions, UNFCCC, UNCDD, and CBD, and other UN policy spaces to address gender-responsive actions to building back better in a just recovery. Four, support the implementation of the Global Forest Goals, especially the Women's Major Group Work Program, focusing on Global Forest Goal 1, 2, 3, and 5. Number 5, capitalize and upscale ongoing women field-based initiatives on ecosystem restoration and sustainable management of forests. Our sixth point is addressing the disproportionate impact of climate change and uneven natural disasters, especially on women and girls and marginalized population. 7, closer linkages and synergies are needed between all our processes at the policy level, just like we try to do with our feminist ally coalitions. Our eighth issues is we need to divert financing from destructive systems to care-based, human and environment, and center gender-responsive systems toward disaster risk reduction and resilience programs in the face of increasing disasters. Number 9 is accelerates an inclusive system and of responding to COVID-19 pandemic solutions in which women and girls are involved, as well as urgent call to shift our relationship with nature in order to prevent pandemics and other natural disasters. And lastly, so this all comes to, as my feminist allies have said, to changing our current system of operation towards care-based systems that are in sync with the environment, with a One Health approach. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cecile. I think, yes, I think looking at, we're covering all the 10 constituencies, you look at the key demands and the key messages, they basically run through the same, right? We need economic justice. We need recognition of rights of women to resources, to lands, including recognizing the environmental human rights defenders, and including, having their economic, social, cultural rights recognized too. Looking at the work that all of you have been doing in different spaces, and also leading, I've known you for such a long time, Cecile, you too, and Sanam, with all this work that you've been doing and some amazing, there have also been some very good outcomes from these engagements. So I also wanted to share with your experience in this work, how do you see and why is it really important to build these collectives and constituencies, the synergies between these UN processes? So Tetet, I'll give you the floor again.
Thank you so much, Tina. I think we are all basically storytellers. That's the way I see feminist activists, movement leaders. We are all storytellers. Through our research, advocacy, campaigns, we are able to organize and mobilize communities on how injustice is really at the core of dispossession, displacement, and disempowerment of people. We are also storytellers because we want for us and everyone else to rewrite that story in order to reclaim our voices and those who have been and are continually being silenced and intimidated. So, but aside from being storytellers, we are also dream weavers. No, some people call us crazies, but I think we are more like dream weavers. We want to build a more just post-pandemic world that works for women, people, and planet. And we want to weave dreams and realize those dreams of equality, human rights, peace, development, basically to reclaim the original aspirations of the United Nations. Now, after all, the UN preamble starts with we, the people. So we are reclaiming, and in that sense, we are strengthening the United Nations by helping it, helping to reclaim the original aspirations. And so we explore and we continue to adopt new ways of organizing and expressing our resistance to the many divides and power imbalances magnified by the pandemic, but have been already existing due to, centuries of colonialism and the continuing reality of unjust trade and investment deals, this finance architecture that continues to extract resources, destroy communities, displace people, which are all subsidized by the continued oppression of women, solidifying patriarchal systems despite the many laws, despite the many conventions that supposedly advance gender equality and women's human rights. And so we build alliances to rewrite our stories, reclaim power, and, realize our right to imagine a future for us and for the next generations. So in that sense, what we're saying is we are building alliances so that we are stronger together in realizing a future that is decolonial, because many of us live in contexts where, colonialism, colonial plunder has led us to this current state of underdevelopment or even maldevelopment. We know that the future that we want is feminist, and we know that alternatives that we are pushing for through these coalitions, through our movements, should be global. No, it's not solutions that are just inwardly looking within our countries, because we realize the interconnections, the interrelatedness in a globalized world. And we know that we need a green new deal, a new deal that brings us, to a feminist, fossil fuel free future for us and for our for the next generations. So this is the most compelling reasons why we build coalitions. We are only a few critical voices within this very intricate labyrinth that is the United Nations system. So with this sisterhood that we have, with our shared aspirations and shared commitment to realizing a just future, then we build power, amplify our voices within the UN system, and we bring that back to our movements, to our communities. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's wonderful. And I think what you really talked about is like, we are dream makers. We are really aspiring for a very just feminist, just society. I think, Son, I'm talking on the same line, but also more in depth about the work that you've been doing, especially, I know I'm kind of harping on that, is also because I think recently the Feminist Response for COVID-19 Collective also brought out a toolkit, right? So that's also really very great to really understand. It's like, I think Cecile was talking about the synergies and how do you really share that, and how these knowledge that are being generated by collectives do feed into and are taken on board by the UN system or globally by everybody. So I also wanted to share, get your experience on the work and a bit more on how this could be done further as a collective.
Thanks, Tina. When you phrase it that way and sort of riffing off of what Ted has been saying about the feminist fossil fuel future that we need to build or we will not survive, and sort of framing why we're doing this alliance building and coalition work in the UN space. I'm reminded of questions sometimes people have of why the UN is hopeless, the UN is useless. Whatever opinion you have on that, at the end of the day, that is the intergovernmental space that is founded on human rights. And we need to take ownership of that space because we are representing communities that are affected by global policy decisions, and yet they have almost no say. They don't even know when an agreement is signed or something is put into motion, or what their governments have agreed to that's going to affect their very lives, the water they use, the land that they grow their food on, where they can sell their produce. This is very important for the constituencies that we're talking about, farmers, fishers, and all kinds of communities. Ultimately, what we are doing, what these alliances are building, is building power. And I want to remind that, almost just over 100 years ago, when the International Labour Organization was formed, we are talking about a time when there was a fear of the workers' movement because they were that powerful. So this is definitely about challenging the systems that make it just about the interaction between the citizen or the resident and the government, and then between governments at the intergovernmental level. And there have been achievements within the UN system in the 2 generations that it has existed, such as the recognition of civil society shadow reports. We basically have done the work of banging down on the doors and saying that we need to be heard. But what I want to highlight is that we are also building solidarity. We are also building a family. And I want us to think about, this Atlantic article that's asked, what if friendship, not marriage, was the center of the life? And if you read that together with what we've learned about solidarity as love, as a greater form than romantic love, because it is unselfish. It is about standing up for those who cannot. We are talking about something deeply personal as well as challenging structures of power. Standing up for within our families and our communities. What feminist alliances have done, we have created a beautiful family. The Feminist COVID-19 Response Collective was a lifeline to so many during this pandemic, especially isolated people. One of our members told us that we saved their life. It is no exaggeration what it means mentally and emotionally to know that your feminist family is there for you.
Thanks a lot. And I think, that those, like I said, what's really very important is also that, yes, UN, the system is there, which is also a space to amplify what's happening on the ground and being able to advocate for that and the change in this policy that, of course, then, trickles down to the national level. Coming from the experience of Cecile, because you also have so much of experience working on the ground, so can you share some of your experience on the strengths or maybe some of the challenges sometimes that can come up with building the collective and these allies? So
yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much again. Yes, Ted did, and also Sanam told it. We believe on coalitions. We have to build coalitions to survive. Unless we do that, we are done. So for us, we have always been working together, and we have many members we shared among our constituencies. So the cross-pollination should definitely naturally happen. We will continue to increase our communication to both learn from each other and see and utilize our collaboration opportunities, such as this side event is a great opportunity for us to share what we are doing, where we are going to, what are the challenges we are facing in our daily work. From our side, we are strengthening our alliances at each step. However, after some point, it becomes dependent upon capacity of each constituency. Many of us are contributing to these constituencies in addition to our work on the ground. So funding our constituencies will strengthen our movement and allow us to reach even further, both in our advocacy, but also in our reach to the grassroots to be able to facilitate the advocacy at the international level, bringing demand from the ground to the UN policy space. For us, this is key and is extremely important. And we are strong, we are as strong as our members and their feminist political vision coming from the ground to the UN policy space. And for this, we really need to be able to reach out more with our intersectional feminist principle to all marginalized groups. So I would like to call on to feminist organizations to contact us, join us, and come and advocate with us so we can hold governments to account on their commitment and in the multilateral spaces together in solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecile. And I think actually you partly answered one of the questions that came from the chat. I'll still read it out to all of you. It says, as feminists, how can we come together at global level and have one clear voice? How can we reach women, young girls who are in rural areas with no access to technology? Before, I'm going to kind of build in one of the, almost the last, I think we'll try to see whether we can get one or two more questions, but also a reminder for our participants and speakers, we have another maybe maximum 5 to 7 minutes for the session. So just building up on that question, and I think this is for all three of you, considering the pandemic and also acknowledging the fact that there has been some technology gap, including assessing virtual events like these. So could you share some of your recommendations or ways forward, looking at like this is kind of becoming a new normal in some cases, and how can we still retain that collectiveness and solidarity? So Tetit again, please.
I think these times are really very challenging, no? Because from mobilizing in huge numbers barely 2 years ago, no, we were all out in the streets and reclaiming the streets for the movements and everyone. We are now facing lockdown restrictions. So how do you build solidarity in times of lockdown restrictions, not travel restrictions? So what we are doing in the region, and I guess beyond, is try to really provide that constellation of support, where and when we can be together. For instance, in areas where there is really strong organizing on the ground, you provide. The first response would be at the moment responses around livelihood, those gut issues that really matter to women and their families and their communities. So being part of that solidarity system is to really be responsive to the urgent needs on the ground, whether it's health, it's food, it's water, electricity. Then you come in, no, and then make everyone feel that we are all in this together. So I think that's one of the major preoccupations that many of our coalitions and organizations are doing. No, instead of spending a lot of time online, virtually, they are really on the ground providing urgent response. And I think that is where we can also factor in or include in our key messaging the need for advocacy. Explaining to everybody, trying to organize that we can all be stronger, not just by supporting each other, but by raising, questions around accountability of local governments, national governments, international institutions, by first responding to what is the urgent and immediate demands on the ground. And I think we are also having a lot of out of the box thinking at the moment, no? How we can amplify resistance in a very limited medium such as virtual platforms. So I guess I leave it to Sanam and Cecile to also add on to all of these.
Yeah, I'll just kind of quickly get in, just to also remind that we might, to ensure that we don't get cut off. Hopefully we have another 5 minutes. So Sanam and Cecile, and maybe I'll come back to you, Tete, to also answer this question. One question which also came about, and is really important, and I want you to, as an ending question, is what are the key priorities? Because this forum, the Gender Equality Forum, is having a very big show, right? I mean, everybody's covering it. You have head of states committing. So what are the priorities that you see for the work that you are doing? So 1 minute each for each one of you. So Sanam, I'll start with you, Cecile, and then Tete.
Oh, so I'm going to have to try and answer these three very wonderful questions in one go. I'll just quickly say I'm very glad that somebody has raised this point about limited technology, because I feel like this is something I keep bringing up. Every time people say that, oh, we can do an online this or a webinar, and I say that, do you know that the digital divide is gendered? Do you know that mobile access is also gendered? And there are communities, I think just under 1 billion, still living without electricity. So when we talk about connecting, we need to talk about connecting in different ways. And that's why I'm not letting go of my ideas about community radio and just old-fashioned, the way that Amnesty International started was with the letter writing campaign. So we need to remember that there were other ways that we got here. And if we're not going to leave anyone behind, the big slogan of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Agenda, so used to the acronyms, then we need to remember those ways of reaching people. But ultimately, the answer to the question of how to reach is organize. Organize. Find a union, find a cooperative, find a collective, start your own. You are you know your reality best. You are the expert, not me, not Tete, not Cecile, not Tina. You know your reality, and you know what is the most strategic to do. And you can always reach out and find us. Our colleagues from the Women's Major Group are tweeting this session. You can find us and our details on Twitter and other spaces. The constituencies that are represented today, we have websites. You can connect with us and join us, or find a way to start your own, find other constituencies that are more aligned to what you're doing. For example, Women's International League on Peace and Freedom, WILPF, they're working in conflict areas. That's an area that perhaps some of us are not so good at reaching at. But there are communities out there that are doing important work. Kashmir, still under, there are many territories such as Kashmir, such as West Papua, and so on, that have the deliberate measures by the incumbent governments and militaries that are in place there, preventing them from connecting with us, and we need to find a way to connect with them. And the offline, old traditional ways may have to be just the way we do it. And yeah, I don't want to take up all the time. I want to let Cecile answer, but just to say that as long as we are living and breathing and fighting, we have to keep fighting for those who came before us. We have to fight for those who cannot dance and live and breathe, because so many people have laid their lives down for what we are fighting for today.
Thanks so much, Sanam. Cecile, could I have you respond? I don't see Cecile here, so I don't know whether we lost connection. So in that regard, Tete, I will. I just wanted to answer this question on the priorities for the GEF. So yeah, please, Tete.
If there is one big takeaway that we would want for the GF to do, is to join us in our call for a people's vaccine. As governments, you can do a lot by supporting the waiver on intellectual property rights over the vaccines and other health equipment and medical supplies. If you really want to talk about just recovery, we have to make sure that vaccine nationalism is no longer a problem, and that everyone has access to vaccine that will really leave no one behind.
Thanks, Tete, for those last ending aspiration and recommendation. Cecile, before we end,
please. Thank you.
So
I think Tete, Yeah, I think Tetet and
Yes.
Sanam said most of what I could say, maybe adding only that for our rural population is come down with the government commitment. I think we need to ensure three major things. How can we help them? Access to information and communicate among themselves, build their capacities to generate more resources for their livelihood, and of course, how to become great leaders to influence everything that is going on in their environment. Those three things, added to what my colleague had just said, will help us move forward and not leave anyone behind. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I think I could go on and have this discussions with all three of you and other constituency members for days, because I think what we are really doing out here is amazing. You know, I've coming as a collective over all these years. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences. And I'm also so happy to have known you in different spaces and be part of the movement. So thank you so much for taking this time. There is, maybe we will take one question. I told you, this is like too tempting not to, if tech will let us. So the last question is, maybe we'll just put it in, okay? I'll speak less. Where is the money for movements and women's and organization? Yeah. Where is the women for movements or for organizations, women's organizations? I think this ties up a lot with Cecile, and I think quickly one minute before we wrap up.
Yes.
So
1 minute. It's really a collective. You know, it's a collective will from everybody, from our government, from the UN system, from all these funding agencies. If they care and if they believe on what we're doing, then they will mobilize adequate resources for us to move forward. Thank you.
Tete, do you have something to add on to that? A minute. Sanam, what about you?
My closing thoughts are simply that we belong in all the spaces that decisions are being made, and the Generation Equality Forum can help break that open for us, because if governments that have committed to being gender champions here, they need to be gender champions not just in women's rights spaces. They need to be gender champions in the World Trade Organization. They need to be champions for us in every single space that affects our lives. This pandemic has taken a toll on women's lives. Women are facing more domestic violence from being locked up at home. 70% of healthcare workers in Africa and Asia are women. We are doing the work. We are being colonized in a way by the patriarchy because of our flexibilized labor, the assumption, thanks to decades of austerity, that we are just going to give care and take care of the elderly and the children, and this is just our gender role. This is not acceptable. If the governments here today are serious about this, we are talking about a care economy. We are talking about reform of trade agreements so that we don't have to face this TRIPS waiver discussion, this special drawing rights discussion, right? You should be setting the agenda in such a way that we should not have to fight so hard for it. That if you are serious about gender equality, you had better have special drawing rights. You had better see beyond just one TRIPS waiver and talk about access to medicine for all across the world. Because right now, we are all sitting in countries that have not received enough stocks of vaccines, while in France, in Europe, they are hoarding vaccines, and they are even hoarding the booster vaccines that are going to come next year for COVID. This is not the way to respond to public health. This is not the way to respond to gender equality. So that's my call of the day. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sanam. I think this is a great message, saying that where we need to put money in where it's needed. We have been talking about gender equality for many years, for decades, and we're still talking the same thing, asking for the same basic rights. Okay, I've got 2 minutes to end, but for all the colleagues who are online and would like to connect with all of us, we have next slide is basically, please do reach out to us. We are all on our websites, and we have our emails, and you could look us for it, and you're most welcome to join any of the caucuses. I don't know whether we have time to show the last slide, but if not, I think you will definitely see our colleagues in the chat who will be sharing their information. So thank you to all the speakers, and thank for all the participants for being here and taking the time out. Thank you very much. Have a good morning, good afternoon, and for people late night, have a good rest. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
thank you to the
System
interpreters.
change.
I'm sorry, we sometimes talk
System
about
change. System change. Thank you.
Everybody.
Yes.